We got to go with it, boys and girls, because the signals are looking good. Here we go. It's been going for 50 seconds and I've been studying like a lemon. Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to VUXWORLD. It's been a hiatus for me, and I don't know if you can tell that by the fact that I've been just kind of rambling for the last 50 seconds trying to see whether or not this is live. Having been live the entire time, I've been away for 2 months. A lot of that time I have indeed had a small child, namely a baby, and my world has been, rocked again, once again, for the second time in life. And so, but we're back now. We're back in the hot seat. Ben has been, carrying the torch and has been rocking it with Conversation Squared podcast. I don't know if you've been listening to those. Probably every fortnight or so, Ben McCulloch will publish and has been publishing some epic interviews with a whole bunch of different conversation designers getting into best practice in conversation design on the VUXWorld podcast. So I definitely recommend you check that out. Also, what's been going on since I've been away is we are hosting our very own conference, the first conversation design conference ever in life to be held in person. It's going to be happening on July the 24th and 25th. Almost forgot what date it was there. July 24th and 25th in London. It's co-organised by VUXWorld and LabWorks, and we are going to have an absolutely fantastic show that we are putting on. The who's who of the conversation design industry is going to be there. Mr. Brett the Voice Box Kinsella is going to be there presenting a unique report that we've had him commission all around the state of the conversation design industry. We're going to be hearing from Lisa Folkestone. We're going to be hearing from Rebecca Evanhoe, Greg Bennett. The who's who is going to be there in conversation design. And so you can get your tickets right now if you go to unparsedconf.com, and if you use the promo code VUXWorld, you will save 50% on your tickets. Remember, July 24th and 25th, and it's going to be absolutely amazing. Look forward to seeing you there. Unparsedconf.com. Before that, we are going to be at Rework. So Rework is hosting the second edition of the Conversational AI Summit in London again in May. The dates are May the 16th and 17th. Well worth taking a look. I went there last year. It was a decent event. Lots of really good speakers, lots of really good content. And so if you are interested in doing something before Unparsed and you want to whet your appetite, so to speak, then head over to Rework's Conversational AI Summit. It is definitely well worth attending. May 16th and 17th. And to find out more about that, you can go to re-work.co/events. And who knows, we might see you there. So looking forward to that. Now then, on with the show. On with today's show after we've been gallivanting around over the first few minutes there. Today we are talking to Yvonne Zgraggen of Swisscom. Swisscom's second appearance on VUXWorld. We had Roger Dill, who was on with Per Otterson, who's the CEO of Artificial Solutions. They were on the podcast probably about 2 years ago now, perhaps, and Roger was sharing a load of information and loads of insights and details around how Swisscom are utilising conversational AI. Yvonne has been there for a number of years, been a conversation designer, working on a lot of these applications, is now a product owner and managing a lot of these applications. And so we're going to get into a really good conversation about that transition from going to conversation designer to going to product owner. I know there's a lot of you out there who are conversation designers now or senior conversation designers, and you may be thinking about kind of your career progression and how you would make a transition from working day to day on designing conversations to then actually having responsibility for the direction and delivery of conversational products. So we're going to get into a whole bunch of different insights that Yvonne's going to share with you about what that role is all about and how she's enjoying it. So without further ado, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Yvonne. Welcome to VUXWorld.
Hi, Kane.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Good. Now, I mentioned the Rework Summit. We met at the Rework Summit last year, didn't we?
Actually correct, yeah. I thought it was the same when you just mentioned it.
Yeah. So there you go. So that is the value of these in-person events, isn't it? Is you make new connections, you meet new people, and that's what it's all about.
Yes, that's true, yeah.
Indeed. So tell us about yourself, Yvonne. I kind of mentioned it a little bit in the intro there. You've been at Swisscom for a while. You've got a lot of experience in conversation design. It's always nice to hear a little bit, about your journey and where did the interest in conversation design come from, and what have you been doing for the past few years?
Yes, correctly. I've been with Swisscom actually for almost 5 years now. I have a background initially in computational linguistics and German linguistics. But I never was really interested in the whole coding aspects or training models. I always focused more on the human part on technology. And when I then started at Swisscom, I started as a UX researcher background. So I mainly did usability testing or interviews with customers, stuff like this. That's also how I got in touch with the Conversational AI department at that time. I did some research for them, and I realized that's actually a pretty interesting field, and also brings kind of together my interest in language and technology and humans, which fit very, very well. So I took over then a position as a conversational designer there. Did also a lot of business engineering. I was actually employed on the business side. But always working in the actual team that implemented chat and voicebot at that time for Swisscom. And now almost a year ago, I took over a new challenge as a product owner in the same division, but different role.
Nice. And so you study computer linguistics.
Correct.
What are the kind of, if you study, because a lot of people who are in conversation design are linguists by trade, and kind of end up in conversation design. Was this a forecasted career path for you? When you study computer linguistics, like, what is it that you're studying if it's not something that is ultimately about human-computer interaction and conversational AI?
Actually, at that time, it was mostly about machine translation. Conversational AI, for example, was not really a huge part of it. I imagine that it's different nowadays, or at least I hope so, that this is a bigger topic also in computational studies. But I wouldn't say that this necessarily is the way to go if you want to become a conversational designer. I think especially my background also in German studies, I benefited a lot from this, knowing how communication works and how also human maybe communicate with technology or computers.
And what kind of, when you started getting into conversation design at Swisscom, what kind of applications were you working on? Was it chat? Was it voice? I know Swisscom do a lot of stuff on a lot of different devices and set-top boxes and a whole bunch of different sort of use cases and surfaces. Like, where did your journey start and what kind of use cases were you working on?
Well, when I started, we had basically three main projects. The chatbot for our residential customers. So when you had a problem with your Swisscom subscription or whatever, you can contact us over that chatbot. We did also the CIVR, conversational IVR, which was mainly routing based that time. So we didn't focus on automation yet. It was mostly about bringing the caller to the correct agent who can help them. And we had the third project, the TV box, a voice box where you could use voice commands to use your TV. Exactly. This project until now is not really something we work on anymore, unfortunately. And at the moment, we're mainly focusing on chatbot, but also CIVR becomes more and more of a topic regarding automation. We definitely want to grow there as well because we see a lot of potential.
So there was a lot of stuff around, probably, I can't specifically remember what year it was, but it was obviously when Alexa had kind of created this first wave of conversational kind of user interfaces, if you like. I know OpenAI and ChatGPT are making, I suppose, more progress towards that vision than Amazon did. But that was the first time, for me at least, I kind of thought, well, this technology really should be across all different surfaces. Doesn't matter what kind of device it is, TVs, watches, earphones, like all these different devices are going to have a unique kind of unifying capability, which is going to be the conversational UI. And so you had a lot of different use cases that came out of that. You had, Disruptal, for example, who are working with the likes of Netflix and others to try and take data that's happening on screen so that you can ask questions about it, like what jacket is James Bond wearing or whatever it might be. You had Comcast, who I think probably around about the same time as Swisscom ended up kind of deploying on set-top boxes for voice control and stuff like that. So you had a lot of these experimental use cases where the use case fit seemed perfect. Who enjoys using a remote control, especially if you want to search for something? It's an absolutely the worst kind of UI ever. And so I'm curious about sort of like from Swisscom's perspective, how did that go? Like, you know, you put voice activation and voice search and stuff like that onto set-top boxes and all that kind of stuff, like, and you mentioned that that's kind of like not so much a thing anymore. Is that because it wasn't really being used? Is it because there was other complications? Like, what are your thoughts generally on how that kind of went?
I wasn't so much involved back then. It was mainly focused on chatbot, but for how I understand it, it's definitely because people didn't really use it here in Switzerland. I think with the whole language, like Swiss German variation we have here in Switzerland, it was always a bit of a struggle getting people to use voice controlled devices, because you need to use like High German, which feels sometimes like a different language for us. It doesn't come very naturally. And I think it was just too early back then with the whole Swiss German models not being there yet, or people not being used to use voice-based technology. And I think that's at least how I see it at the moment, that's one of the main reasons why we didn't really continue that path. But I mean, still our customers have their Swisscom TV box at home. They have their device, which can be voice controlled also in the future. It's not like we are not thinking in that direction right now, but at the moment it's not. I can definitely imagine that in the future we'll also continue there.
Yeah,
but at the moment,
I think the language component is crucial, isn't it? You know, like if you don't have the ability to provide something in the kind of, I suppose, for want of a better phrase, the native tongue sort of thing, and you're forcing people to speak in a slightly different dialect, like the value of the conversational interface is that it bends to your needs rather than you bending to it. So I imagine that could have been a bit of a barrier. But I think in theory, you know, that as a use case is still a good fit for, you know, a voice UI.
Definitely.
So what is it that you're doing now then? Are you still working on the chatbot side of things? I wonder if you can describe your role as it is today.
Yes, actually both. So in my team, we have both working on CIVR and chatbot at the same time. So yes, that's what I'm. And but basically I have a team of 8 people at the moment, yes. And yeah, I see myself somehow in the middle between actual business requirements for chatbot and CIVR and the implementation that actually happens then afterwards in my team. Kind of stakeholder management, requirements, refinement of features, prioritization afterwards, and making sure the team knows what to do and what that the actual benefit comes out of what we do for our customer and also for business.
Yeah, and so what kind of roles are in that team? You mentioned there's about eight or so people. Like, can you describe to me the makeup of skill sets that you've got?
It's actually a pretty diverse group with different know-how and skills, which makes it very interesting, I think. So we have like your classical software engineers, but we also have what we call them knowledge engineers. So people who build or implement the dialogues of our chatbot or voice bot. Then we have, of course, conversational designer, and also people coming from a more business-oriented perspective, like business engineering, who know the whole processes behind the ones we are actually trying to automate in the end. Yes.
Mm. And do you kind of bring those people in as and when kind of thing, you know, because I imagine different departments you work with, you're going to have the requirement for different subject matter experts and stuff like that. So does that team change when you go into different projects, or is it fundamentally the same?
No, at the moment it doesn't change. At the moment it's those people who who or like the intersection of these different departments that we actually work with them. Yes. So they and yeah, no, it doesn't change at the moment.
That makes sense. You mentioned a few things there about, one of the roles in as a product owner now is things like defining the roadmap and defining features and things like that. And for conversational applications, you've got, on the one side, you've got stakeholders that want something. It should do this, it should do that, we should have it do this, that, and the other. On the other side, you've got actual users talking to the thing every day. Yes. And, I've found that most of the time, what stakeholders want doesn't always coincide with what users are actually doing. And so there's a risk there that actually you end up prioritizing a whole bunch of features and spend a whole load of time and effort building stuff that just doesn't actually matter for the end users. And at the same time, you've got end users having conversations with it about things that, a business stakeholder might look at and think, well, why are we answering questions like that? And so a business stakeholder is not going to prioritize certain things because it's probably seen not to add a credible amount of value. However, when a user is having a conversation with this thing, every time that thing doesn't understand them and doesn't respond to them accordingly, it lets their experience suffer. So how do you balance the kind of requirements from internal stakeholders saying we want it to do this and the realities of what customers are actually having conversations about today?
Well, that's a constant balancing act in reality, let's say, and probably one of my key challenges as a product owner to find that balance and to level it out in both directions, right? Experience, business requirements, and what is actually possible from an implementation point of view is also something sometimes completely different, right? And yeah, it's usually I have to take this case by case and really also go into discussion with the stakeholders to understand their needs, but also collaborate very closely with our engineers or the people in my team who actually implement, and then of course on the other hand also understand the customers and how they use our systems. And then that's kind of how I see my role as a bit of someone who has the overview on all these three aspects and tries to bring them together. And that's also what makes it really interesting in the end. Yeah. But in the end, it's not like I have a perfect solution to this. It's really day by day, it's different. Sometimes I need to also push back on experience side, make maybe someone on business side a bit more happy, and then on the other next day maybe I can also bring some more experience related things forward. Yeah, it's really cool.
Because it's interesting because you've got kind of like, in some cases you might be tempted to kind of go with the flow for the sake of kind of building relationships and keeping people happy, because ultimately the stakeholders that you're working with, if you're not working necessarily, either you're not working directly with their department, but you might be in future, so you need relationships to be built and foundations to be laid so that you've got things can kick off on a good foot when the timing is right. At the same time, if you are working directly with their department, you still need their support because you're going to need access to their resources and systems and this, that, and the other. And so there's a temptation sometimes to kind of like, let certain things slide or do certain things for the sake of building the relationship, knowing that what you do isn't ultimately going to even be used sometimes. I mean, we've built things in the past where, it's like, okay, fine, we'll just do that to sort of keep you happy because we don't want to just say no to absolutely everything all the time, And so, so you end up kind of building things that are not going to necessarily be used and then don't get used. But then it's kind of like, how do you kind of like pursue the conversation next time around about, well, we're not going to do that this time because last time we did that, it didn't get used, because that's a potential difficult conversation to have. I wonder if you've been in a situation like that before where you've gone along with something because you want to kind of build a relationship, but then, it can sometimes, proving that what you did hasn't been used and you said it wouldn't be used is, it's a bit of pill to swallow for some people sometimes.
Very helpful, and also see that people outside of our conversational AI department understand is data. So if we have a lot of data, what our customer actually ask and what they do in our systems, and if I bring in those data as an argument, usually this helps. And sometimes it's not that easy to find the right data to back up your arguments. And these are usually the cases where you just end up doing what business wants, right? But whenever I see, I also need to, I have a lot of experience, and I also, sometimes I need to listen to my gut feelings and try to find the right data to really show how customers actually use the system, and how they can benefit or what they actually need. And usually I find that business is also interested in helping our customers in the end. And if you bring those two things together, like their interest and the data, then you might find spots or cases where both can actually benefit from what we do in our conversational AI area.
Absolutely, and that's the goal, isn't it? You want to align customer needs and business needs. And there is some things that there won't be any evidence of customers requiring, but it's a good thing to have in there. Questions around, if somebody asks, is this call being recorded? What do you do with my data? Can you delete my data? Where's it stored? Who's got access to it? This is stuff that this conversation might never happen, but if it does happen, it's such a value-added kind of capability to be able to have a conversation with a customer about their data and their privacy, because those are the conversations that are going to really build trust with certain customers. If a customer's asking about that stuff, they're obviously concerned about it, potentially not wanting to have a conversation with this assistant through fear of privacy and security. So the ability to be able to answer those questions is a real trust builder, but it might never happen. So is it the right thing to do to build that stuff in there as a sort of comfort blanket in case, or should you worry about doing other things where you have data to support the need for?
Well, we definitely started on the side where we saw business need, and also where we had like those huge use cases that were obviously often asked. And then at some point we realized it's just not enough, that we need to distribute the knowledge of our chatbot, for example, broader, but in a simple way. So what we do right now is that we have basically those short FAQ answers for basic needs or basic questions that might not occur so often. And whenever we see use cases that are more complex and more frequent, that we try to go in a more transactional end-to-end direction to also solve the use case within that, for example, the chatbot. And I think that's we make good experience with this combination, that we try to build up those use cases that are more complex or more often asked as well.
Absolutely. So you've spent a lot of time designing conversations. You are now in the product owner sort of position. As we said at the beginning of the podcast, there'll be people who are in conversation designers right now, looking at things like career progression and all that kind of stuff, like going from a conversation designer to a product owner. What were some of the things that were most notable in terms of either differences or learning experiences, or just kind of things that have changed, I suppose, from your old role to this role?
So the main change was probably that I'm more able to influence what is been done, what happens also in the future on the long term as well, and not so much the how it actually is implemented anymore. And I at the beginning I was a bit worried about this change, because I always thought of myself as a very hands-on person, and I liked the actual doing as well. But I absolutely realize that I'm in the right place with also like what I just described about having the overview. With my experience, I know the people in the company. I know how our division works, how people use conversational AI at Swisscom, and yeah, it's just the right place for me to also bring that knowledge to my team and to enable them in their daily work so they can also benefit from this. Yeah, so the biggest change is probably that I'm not so much hands-on anymore, but that's okay for me right now.
Because I suppose for some conversation designers that love designing conversations, yet probably want more. I mean, a lot of conversation designers are heavily involved in the strategy formation side of things and all that kind of stuff and road mapping and stuff like that. But there's always that kind of transition, and I suppose it's the same when you go into any management position in any company anywhere. You know, you're doing less.
In the end, it's also about the culture in your team. Probably you have then. I mean, it's like we still have those sessions where those conversational designers bring their designs, for example, into the team, and we challenge them together and discuss them. And that's something I'm also involved sometimes, so I can still take a bit of an interest there and also influence it a bit if I really see I have an opinion about something I want to bring to their attention. But in the end, yeah, it's just a natural change. If you go on with in a different role, you have different responsibilities then.
Do you find yourself, so the first time I ever went into a kind of management position, one of the things that was not necessarily a challenge, but I just couldn't help myself, was that you go from being knee deep in the work to then managing the work in a team. And there's a temptation, and I think I'm still probably guilty of this in sometimes, which is that there's a temptation to, whenever there's an output, you judge the output in line with your own expectations of yourself and how you would have done something and how you would approach a certain thing. And so there's a kind of fine balance, especially if you're really passionate about something like conversation design. There's a fine balance between empowerment and kind of autonomy, which you have to give to the team.
Yes.
And that kind of like now focusing on the output and the deliverables, but still having a real deep passion about the experience. And so there's a sort of fine line where there's a risk of either being a real kind of micromanager, which obviously you don't want to be, but at the same time you've got experience. And so it's kind of, there's a fine line, isn't there, when you go from practically working on something day to day to then managing something. You have to sort of find a way to almost get out of the way in some instances. Don't sweat the small stuff and almost kind of just raise the big stuff, you know.
Yes, I know that feeling very well. In the end, yeah, I also don't have really the solution, but I think it also, trust is probably an important keyword here. If you trust your team, and also if you have good people in your team, then you know you can trust them and doing your good work. And I think whenever we do, for example, feature refinement, discuss potential new topics we want to implement, I think I can still bring this kind of passion into the discussion, and they also take over a bit. How they see why it's important, and I can still stress that very much. And I think that's it's just a different way of influencing things. In the end, it's in there. Yeah, but in the end, I need to trust them, and sometimes this works better than sometimes it doesn't. Yeah.
What were some of the, I suppose, more surprising parts? So we spoke about some things that are different, but what about like surprising things that you wouldn't have expected to be part of this role?
That's a good one. Well, in the end, it's still very much about humans, right? If you're a product owner, first I was designing conversation for humans in order to make them understand, or in order to make them being able to communicate with our conversational AI. And now I still cannot translate between humans, but in a different environment, maybe, or a different level. So I also think, in a way, it hasn't changed a lot. It's just a different level now of area of influence is different now. But yeah.
Nice. Taras has commented saying, "I won't judge your temptations, kid." So Taras runs our marketing, and maybe has fallen foul to some of the things we were just talking about there, with me being, I don't think hopefully I don't micromanage. I really don't want, because I don't have time to micromanage. But every now and then it's like, what about this? What about that? What about that? Yeah. So. We spoke a little bit there about stakeholder management, and one side of that is taking requests and roadmap items and features and things like that from stakeholders, and the balancing between what do we do because you want to do it versus what do we do because there's actually evidence suggesting we should do it. But also there's a bit that comes before that, which is you're working on a new use case with a new department, and not everybody, as hard as it is for me to believe, not everybody is wildly passionate about conversational AI. And not everybody really even understands conversational AI. And so you've got this potential gap between business stakeholders and the people who you need within a certain department to be able to bring these things to life, and their kind of expectations and understanding of what's possible, how to go about it, and all that kind of stuff. So are those conversations that you still have kind of frequently in terms of educating people about what's possible and educating people about the scope and limitations and things like that? Or has Swisscom developed a level of maturity where, you've been doing it for so long, you've worked with lots of different departments, and so the level of understanding is kind of up there?
I would say it's better now than like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. It's also, of course, we have a good momentum right now with all the hot topics, and people are more and more understanding. I mean, 3 years ago when I told them I'm working on a chatbot, some people didn't even know we had a chatbot within Swisscom. And now I think it's known that we have one, and also what we do around CIVR is pretty common knowledge. And I see that there is also a lot of expectation around this. If you test other chatbots around, and then you come with a certain image in your head and how this should work, or why doesn't it work like this? I asked it, but it didn't respond in a way that I would have expected it. And this is still something I have very often, yes. And then usually, it just needs time to also bring these people up to date, what's actually behind, explain them how we work. And I find that people usually are quite interested, actually. That has also changed over time now. At least they see a benefit, or they see also that, they also talk to different companies in Switzerland over conversational AI now, and they realize that it's a thing, right? People are using it, and this has definitely changed, yes. So it doesn't need that much convincing anymore.
Right, that's good. That's good. What about expectations then? Because, we are absolutely going through a kind of another hype cycle at the moment. We went through it with Facebook Messenger, we went through it with Alexa, and now we're going through it again with OpenAI and ChatGPT. Has that affected expectations of people at Swisscom?
Definitely, yes. Well, internally, we're also heavily discussing how to make use of these new OpenAI models, and we're also experimenting in this area, but that's not so much happening in my team right now, because that's also how I see it at the moment. Whereas new topics arise, you need to investigate how you can use them. But on the other hand, you still have your goals and your daily business happening, and you cannot so much as press pause on this, right? So somehow you need to divide a bit how that some people take an interest or take a look at how this technology how we can make a use of this technology, which we are definitely doing. And on the other hand, the show must go on, right? We have people using chatbot daily and also calling us regularly. So it's not like we can just start again from scratch with something new.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's to be honest, that's kind of the best way anyway. If you've got something that's already working, then there's no need to just throw a new technology at it for the sake of throwing a new technology at it. Like, it was funny, I've seen so many kind of like briefs and stuff recently which begin with, we need a ChatGPT style bot that does this, and this. And it's kind of like, okay, like, so it's catching people's imagination. The temptation is, let's just throw it in there. Whereas,
I mean,
the better route is to fold it in.
I also understand it. You try it and it feels good. It's a good experience. And then you test our chatbot maybe, and it's different, right? And then I also understand why people are asking, why aren't we there yet? And sometimes, it's hard to explain.
Yeah. But I think folding it into things is a kind of a good way of going about it, having it do things like generate training data for intents and basic stuff like that, where there's nothing impact on the front end, especially for Swisscom and the vast majority of businesses that isn't kind of Snapchat, like tongue-in-cheek, sort of like playful brand, doesn't really matter if we get things wrong kind of thing, or for Microsoft where it's quite obviously a kind of trial beta product with Bing GPT. So like for companies that are either a bit tongue-in-cheek or are quite blatantly doing things in a playground kind of environment, it's a bit different. The challenge is when you bring it into an enterprise where accuracy is absolutely paramount, and when you're having 1 million conversations a month, you can't afford for 1% of those conversations to not be accurate. And so it's kind of folding it into the design phase is where I'm seeing a lot of teams start, and that's what we're doing. That's what we're using it for mostly, is things like that, generating intents, generating training data, test data, all that kind of stuff is seems to be all right there. But I definitely wouldn't be advising at the moment for a company like Swisscom to be starting to push things out and have this thing manage conversations with customers at scale at the minute.
Sure, I agree.
Yeah, it's mad. So part of I suppose it's kind of related in a sense that accuracy, needing to be accurate, needing to have information being accurate, but you also need to have business processes being carried out in an accurate way, which again, potential some dubiation. I was going to say dubiation, but that sounds a bit too much like jubilation. So there's some cautiousness which you would need to have if you want to have an LLM be involved in managing a business process. But the concept of automating business processes using conversational AI is something that people are starting to get to. Like, everyone starts typically, or not everyone, but a lot of companies start with like the FAQ stuff, simple question and answer stuff, and then they will go to sort of like data retrieval. So we'll use an API to pull data into a conversation, retrieve data from business systems and stuff like that, and then they'll kind of mature to the point where they feel comfortable enough to push data into systems, and now you can start having transactions. You can start conducting transactions, and you can start to automate business processes. But what most organizations do is they will start automating business processes based on the existing business process. So what do we do today? Let's automate that. And that's fine if you've gone through a lot of work on your processes and you've streamlined all your processes and you've got API access to everything and everything's kind of streamlined. But a lot of businesses haven't done that work yet, haven't reorganized or streamlined their processes, and they're trying to kind of figure out how to make conversational automation work with essentially legacy processes as such. I'm wondering what your experience is of approaching these more transactional use cases, where it's not just about conversation design, it's about system architecture and sequencing and broader kind of business process management, fitting that into the wider business process. Like, I wonder if you can share some experiences and maybe some insights or tips in terms of how you've been approaching that.
This has definitely been a very interesting journey, and we're somehow it feels like we've just started, but actually we have already done some quite interesting stuff. I feel like, for example, we have our billing system integrated into our chatbot. So if you have questions about your bill, you cannot pay it on time, for example, it is now possible that you can extend your payment deadline over the chatbot. And this is exactly what you described. So we check first, of course, we need to make sure we know the customer. So you need to be logged in, and then we check whether you're allowed to extend your payment deadline or not. And we actually do this and write it back into our billing system. So we don't send out friendly reminders that you didn't pay your bill yet. And this was probably one of our first use cases where we started with this. And it was a lot of work, exactly because what you just described, process was always there. The systems behind with the API, they have been there for a long time, and they weren't, of course, built for us to use it in conversational AI. And yeah, we just adopted it into our system and tried to build the whole conversation around it and make it work. And obviously, this is not an approach that is scalable, let's say. If you really do this for each use case, it takes a lot of time. Of course, if you have more and more experience, you also become faster, I would say. But in the end, I also see that trying to find new use cases we could do this, we often stumble across those APIs that were simply not, they don't fit our needs sometimes, really. One example is also that they fit a more UI-based need. For example, we have our Swisscom app where you can do pretty much all that you can think of, also self-service, which is pretty cool. But if you want to do things in a conversational way, then you have just different needs than sometimes you have in app. Right? And this is something that we are really in the middle at the moment, that we approach people responsible for those APIs and also show them our needs. And the good thing is they usually understand our needs, and they also see how we could benefit. But I mean, if in a huge company like Swisscom, those processes, you cannot change them overnight. And just because there's a conversational AI department which needs something different, right? This takes time.
Yeah. Maybe in time, and hopefully when the demand grows and grows and grows, so that conversational AI aggregated across all channels becomes the predominant kind of contact channel, then maybe that might change. But yeah, it's interesting. It's so does Swisscom have kind of like a kind of like a homegrown kind of build it yourself sort of mentality? Do you tend to buy a lot of stuff off the shelf? It's all homegrown stuff.
We like to build our stuff ourselves usually.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, so IT are probably you know, a lot of their priorities is going to be, you know, managing, maintaining,
Yes.
and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Interesting. No, it's good. It's good stuff. That I think that, you know, when it comes to the business process side of things, in time, you know, the conversation, as I said, if providing you can get to a place where your conversational interfaces are taking up a significant demand, then the conversational UI becomes in a position to potentially start driving some of those processes, because it's the only way, like it's the only method of getting kind of real-time feedback in a specific process. So if someone's filling in an online form or doing something on their website and stuff like that, or in the app or something like that, I mean, most processes are probably going to be straightforward enough that you can do it online or you can do it in the app and stuff like that. But that still doesn't stop people from calling. Still doesn't, you know, even if it's just 20% of your customer base that call, you know, that 20% across millions of customers is still millions of customers. And so, you know, and then also there's certain other UI benefits that you get from having a conversational interface, you know, speed and all that kind of stuff. But over time, you know, if conversational UIs can get into a situation where they are the dominant kind of interaction channel, then you're getting data on those processes in real time that you can use to improve not just the business process, but the business more generally, and that doesn't, in fact, conversational AI doesn't need to be the predominant channel for that to happen. I'm sure that in Swisscom, you're getting data from conversations that relate to a different area of the business that you can use to inform that area about of the business about certain product or service issues that they may not have been aware of because they're not involved in them conversations,
Yeah, that's something we actually just start doing, or at least I feel that way, that we still do not leverage this enough in our company, that we actually have real-time feedback from our customer. Of course, if you call and then you speak to an agent, that's also real-time feedback. But in our case, if we really have the transcripts, we really have statistics also. You can read through what the customer said or wrote, and this really provides so much insight into what our customer needs and say and how they feel about it. There's lots of emotion in there, and that's something we just start more and more using, and also business, of course, sees a benefit in this. Yes, and also, for example, to help agents, right, with the we don't have necessarily the need to automate all the requests from our customers. In the end, some cases will always, at least that's my opinion, will always end up with a human. But if we manage to help the human solving with what we already know, for example, from the previous conversation with the chat or voice bot, that's also a benefit, right? That's
absolutely. Wicked. Final question, any kind of advice to, not just conversation designers, but anyone who's working in conversational AI field or wants to work in the conversational AI field that would be useful for them if they're thinking about kind of being a product owner?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, my feeling is that the network is very important there. So if you work in a company or in the field of conversational AI, that you also know your people around, that you know who, maybe at some point when you meet someone you don't know yet, this person could be interesting at some point for you if you're looking for a new opportunity. But this is definitely something that I found to be very helpful in these cases. And in the end, yeah, always coming back to what makes you passionate about, but also is fun for you to go to work. Actually, think about this, and if you take on a new opportunity on your job, keep that in mind. What makes you passionate, and if this still applies in your new job as well.
Nice. Perfect. Well put. Very, very nice. Thank you so much, Yvonne, for joining us. Thank you for tuning in. Apologies we started a little bit late, but it was an immense conversation. I knew it would be. It was a great conversation for anyone who is interested in conversational AI generally, but also if you're looking to try and become a product owner and make that transition. A fantastic episode. Really appreciate that, Yvonne. And don't forget, Unparsed, 24th and 25th of July. In London this year, in person, the world's first conversation design conference. Visit unparsedconf.com, promo code VUXWORLD to save 50% on your early bird tickets, and also the Rework Conversational AI Summit in May, this month actually. It's in like 2 weeks' time, 16th and 17th of May, again in London. It's all happening in London right now, so please do check it out and get yourselves there. And we'll see you tomorrow. We've got another podcast episode tomorrow. We're coming thick and fast, you see. We have a couple of months off while I go away and selfishly have a baby. And then and then we're back on track. We are talking with Nick Shepherd tomorrow, which is going to be absolutely immense. So please do tune in for that one. We'll see you.